Gaurav Sharma has the very rare distinction of being the only guest I've ever interviewed who's also been an answer on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. It's true, look it up, I'm sure you'll find it. He's one of these people who gets to juggle being both an MP and knowing what it's like to look at a pandemic from the perspective of a doctor. So his insights have been absolutely fascinating, learning about some of the weird protocols that are in place for our MPs, as well as how people have coped and looked at the pandemic as a whole, and the advice that he gives at the end of this interview as well about how you can cope with the pandemic is really interesting and very helpful. So enjoy the interview. Thank you very much for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me, Paul. It's been quite a few years now since I've been on your show.
It has. Well, I haven't had a show for quite a few years. I've been up here 3 or 4 now. A while.
That's right. But you were there at the election night, weren't you?
I was, yeah. I was very honoured to be invited back down to work with the election night guys that were there. It was, I love election nights myself. Like, I love the adventure of seeing what's coming through and seeing the numbers as they filter in, and yeah, it's very exciting. How was that as a candidate?
Oh, look, it was still a blur what happened that day, and for us, I guess we really thought it would be maybe 100 votes here and there, and we hadn't done any polling or anything like that. We just figured we'd just give it our best shot. And I'm always a little bit more practical one in my whole campaign team. I remember. Our selection was very heated, primary selection of a candidate was very heated, and it took years of preparation in a way. And when I got selected, my team was crying. And I was like, yeah, all right, well, tomorrow we start a campaign. And they were just like, but you're not crying. You're like, you haven't even taken it in that, you're a candidate now. And I said, yeah, well, we've got an election to win. And same thing on election night, like the whole team was crying, everybody was crying, happy tears. And I was just going, well, it's probably just the early voting period. And we know a lot of, later supporters, especially vote early. So maybe it's just that, and the tide will turn. And I didn't even believe it, even when Tim McIndoe and David Bennett graciously both came to accept, that to concede. And I think even at that point, there was about 45% votes counted in.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a lot. So I never really took it that we'd won that night. And I think even until next day, was just kind of like a blur, like, is it real or was I imagining it?
I saw Tim that night. He came in quite early in the process, and he knew then. Like the very first numbers that we had come through, there was a polling booth that had like 9 votes, like it was next to nothing, and they were all for Tim. And then the next one came in, and the polling booth went your way, and then the third one came in, and the polling booth went your way, and Tim came in just after that third one, and the look on his face was, oh damn, like he could see the writing on the wall. Like, very gracious in his time's up. He's been there, I think it was 12 years that he was in the role. Like, it's a very long time to be in that position, and a very hard thing to walk away from. But right from the moment he could see the numbers turning towards you, he knew what was coming. Like, he knew exactly where it was going.
And it's interesting. We've had quite a few conversations after the election, me and Tim both, and he said to me that he'd known for many months. And he said, the hardest thing is knowing it for such a long time and still putting up a brave face.
Yeah.
And I was just joking with him, and I said, well, you should have said something, because we would have stopped working hard. Because we really didn't think, we thought it might be 100 votes here and there. So we really worked our ass off. And he's still very gracious. We get along so well. But yeah, I think they might have done polling as well, on their side, but we didn't. So we really didn't expect that.
That they definitely did some polling. And he knows full well that your seat is a bellwether seat. And going into the election, I was actually on ABC, I think in Adelaide, and they were asking me, so what are the chances that Jacinda's not going to win? There's no chance. Like, we're at this point in the polling where the question isn't how much does she, is she going to win? It's how much does she win by? Who does she bring into Parliament? And then I was surprised to see that it was so close to that sort of absolute majority there. Like, it was like I thought you'd be right up to the line. I didn't think you'd be over the line. So that was a really impressive outcome. Very impressive outcome.
Yeah, and huge thanks to everyone who was involved. And we had quite a few of these, campaign conversations where we were like, well, do we actually do polling? And I said, yeah, but what does that mean, right? Like if it says we're ahead and we're gonna win, then people just get complacent. So why would we do that? And if it says we're not gonna win, then we're not gonna go around being sad and not actually doing the work. So we're just gonna put in 100%. And then, we just wait and see what happens on election night. And I've always been kind of like that, because there's so many factors involved. Look at the 2017 election. Like, who would have thought that Labour would have won?
Yeah, that was an interesting one down to the wire as well. And that was all thanks to Winston Peters. Interesting fellow.
Exactly. Yeah, in both elections. I mean, and it's interesting when you follow world politics and everyone's like, oh, yeah, but, little old New Zealand, everything's all good there and politics isn't as interesting. But in the month leading up to election, every time it just gets so interesting.
It does. It goes crazy. And I don't think people realize it when they're watching it from their couch. When they sort of sit there and there's a poll that comes out and there's a debate on TV and you sort of get that impression, you see all the signs go up. When you're actually talking to the people on the ground who are going out there and handshaking and meeting people and dealing with the issues hand to hand, you get a really interesting outlook on how their electorate sees them and their electorate sees the issues that they have to deal with. And I don't think anyone is ever fully aware of some of the issues that you guys actually have crop up. And then, of course, the last term, you had everything crop up. Like you've in the last couple of years, you've had terrorist attacks and volcanoes and there was a pandemic in there somewhere, outbreaks, floods. It's literally been everything thrown at you. It can't be an easy situation to be sitting there going, crap, now I'm in charge of this.
Well, I'm not in charge. I'm not in charge. Thankfully, I'm not in charge. But I do often reflect and think about, like maybe 30 years from now, you look back and you go, wow, did it really happen like that? Like were we in a pandemic where we were locked in for, or, in a way isolated from the rest of the world for such a long time? Or what happened in Christchurch, or with the volcano as well. So there's quite a few things, and I think in that moment, because in a politician's life, in a way, there's every day something going on, and we were just I was giving a few examples before as well. Like every day something happens that you're not expecting, even on a small scale. So there's never really a moment to just reflect and go, oh, this is something's happened, because by next day, the status quo has changed again.
When was the last time you got some downtime?
I have had, I think 3 days off this year, and they've been.
Well, I mean, we're only 10 months in. That's plenty, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think, I never expected this job to be easy, but I have to say one of the most interesting thing, and a lot of people don't know this, and every time I tell them is, so when we're in Parliament, we're not allowed to leave until 10 p.m. at night. Like physically, you can't leave the building. Yeah, and that's something so fascinating. So
why? Is there a logical reason for it?
So from what I've been told, and I've actually tried to find it in writing, is that 75% of the members of Parliament have to be on precinct for parties to be able to cast their vote.
Is that a quorum, essentially, like a quorum requirement? Okay.
Exactly. And the 25% who get time off are, obviously the Prime Minister and the ministers, or, if you're not in a government party, then other members, leaders of their party. So you have to have it in writing, which means even if you wanted to cross the road and get paracetamol or get a coffee, like you literally can't leave the actual perimeter of the building.
Wow.
I know, and that was very interesting for me. But but it is quite draining on you as well. For example, on Tuesday, I get up at 4 a.m. I'll catch a 6 o'clock flight, and then I'm there. I can't leave the building until 10 p.m. at night. So by the time you get to your hotel, it's easily after 11 o'clock at night. And then Wednesday, you're back up again for your select committee, which starts super early in the morning, and then there are 3 meetings before that. So by the time you've done your Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, you've already done 40 hours plus. Not that it was ever a 40-hour job.
Oh yeah, I don't think people realize just how much work goes into it. Like there'll be some people, like I know with local body politicians, there's an impression that for some people that's a retirement job. But when it comes to a central government role, it is not the case by a long shot.
No, and some of my quite popular posts on my Facebook have been about just sharing what I do in a day.
Mm.
And just the amount of people just going, what, really? I just thought you guys are just like out there having coffee, or, I only see you in one meeting or two meetings. And I think a lot of people don't realize it's not just public meetings.
Yeah.
There's a lot of meetings where you just prepare for things, or you can't talk about it because, things might be sensitive. But it's not just the one or two meetings people might see us broadcasted on. There's quite a lot goes on in it, but people find it fascinating too. And I was just, it's interesting just telling people about what your normal day looks like. Well, there is no normal day, but what a day could look like.
How much did that change when COVID hit?
Well, I guess, when I started, it was after the pandemic started.
Yeah, that's true.
Last year. But, it's interesting again. So, I mean, in my previous life, I was a doctor working as a GP. And I still remember the first lockdown, just the uncertainty of practicing in an environment where the whole country is going into a lockdown. And I remember the team meeting, and I still have a photograph of it. All of us just sitting there, just 2 meters apart, just going, well, how are we going to do this?
Is there a space in Parliament where you could fit the entire caucus in there with 2 meters spacing other than the House?
Oh yes, there is. No,
okay.
but this is me talking about my medical practice. But that lockdown, it was just really interesting and going, well, what does a phone consult for a doctor look like? Because we're just not used to doing virtual consults. And now same thing, like you switch your parliamentary work to virtual as well. And it's been really interesting. I mean, last 2.5 weeks, a lot of our committees have been running online. It's pretty much been as busy as it normally would be because, constituents ask about, somebody's got questions around wage subsidy. Somebody wants to know if their businesses can open. Somebody's complaining about their neighbor's business being open.
Of course, yeah.
There's all sorts of things. And, there are people who are saying, well, actually, I decided not to stay at home and actually went to grandma's, and now I'm second level 4. I shouldn't have gone to Auckland. I really want to be in Hamilton, like all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's been quite busy, and doing it over Zoom and over phone calls is definitely a different turn as well. But what is different is, like when I was a doctor and in the lockdown, in a way, I think I really enjoyed the fact that I could just drive to work, with that and quiet roads, and it just felt like you were still in a way not in a lockdown because you could still just go out. Whereas now, as a regular citizen, not being a frontline healthcare worker, I'm pretty much locked inside my house doing meetings.
But I was sure I saw a politician the other day tell me it was essential you guys got to do whatever you pretty much wanted.
Well, look, I mean, even on paper, I guess you could go out and be doing things, but like there's nothing that you, as a politician at the moment, that you really need to be doing out and about. So anything I've gone out and done is shopping, grocery shopping.
Which I know what that's like. That's the exciting part of the week now, is going out and doing the shopping.
Well, funny, this year I have barely had any time to cook. And after we went into lockdown and I went to the supermarket, before I went to the supermarket, I kind of was panicking because I was like, oh, I've got no food at all because I'm barely home.
Yeah.
And then when I went to the supermarket, I was just going, well, what do I buy? Like, I can't even remember what's at home. What do I need to buy? So that journey in itself has been really interesting. And I've been cooking every day nowadays, which has been really great. Therapeutic.
You're based in Hamilton at the moment, aren't you? Not stuck down in Wellington. Yeah. So
no.
You've had no cases, which is a really good thing, which is a very, very lucky thing. And you've got takeaways now.
Yes, we have got takeaways, and I have really tried. Like, I haven't had a single one, and that's just part of being healthy. Because after I sort of got into Parliament, last election actually I gained 25 kgs, then I had to lose 25 kilograms, and that's just part of the just stressful job and not having a regular timing. So again, I feel myself like not being healthy, not normally getting time to go to the gym or go for a walk. So during lockdown, I've decided, look, even though the takeaways are open, I'm just not going to go, because once you start going, then you get into this easy habit.
As a medical professional, how do you feel the country has been going so far with the way that we're moving around how lockdowns work and going into lockdowns and the stress that comes with lockdowns? Do you sort of see both sides of the argument for and against them there?
Well, it's interesting. I think having a bit of an international perspective as well, and talking to friends overseas, it's just incredible how I think often people's perception is also molded by the leaders. And what I mean by that is, look, I was recently talking to a friend from my MBA class in America, and this chap was saying, well, he's supposed to be working from home because it's pandemic, so he decided that it's holiday time, so he's actually gone to Europe, and he's traveling in Europe while he's
That
working
doesn't sound
flexibly.
safe.
I know, and I was saying to him, I was like, well, surely the reason you're supposed to be working from home is because there's a pandemic. And he's like, yeah, but that's great, isn't it? Like, I don't have to be at work, so I'm in Spain, and that's really incredible. And I think for a lot of New Zealanders, I think they would be just as shocked, confused, and surprised as me,
Yeah.
going, well, this makes no sense. So I think on average, like, I felt like, New Zealanders are just more very practical about it, and just understand why we are doing this. Whereas a lot of countries, it's basically, and I think part of that is, again, because they didn't do their lockdown right at the beginning. So now they're in a situation where, you do these half lockdowns where you close the country for 2 weeks, and then people get angry, then they open it up again, numbers go up, people are out on the beach, they're going on Mediterranean holidays, then they come back. So in that way, I think we've done really well. And then elimination strategies worked really well as well from day one. And part of that is, like, once you lose control, it's very hard to go back.
Yeah.
So I think we've done really well. And, as the Prime Minister keeps saying, the team of 5 million. And people really, I think the biggest thing is, the people are vested in it. Everyone feels like at the end of the day, it's only going to help their business and their family and their lives if they do follow the instructions. So I think for the most part, like, people have followed it, and we've done really well, really well.
Even if you look at the neighbours over the Tasman, where they're trying to keep things open and keep the numbers down, and they're hitting 1,000 cases plus a day. It's kind of scary to see just the difference between the two.
Exactly. Oh, definitely. I mean, anywhere, like, some countries you get 50,000 cases, 60,000 cases. They've opened up, and even as you said, like New South Wales, there's about 1,000 cases a day sometimes, and it is incredible to see that. And we are very lucky that our numbers are in the 20s. Thankfully, because we've followed the guidelines, the best practice.
So I had a conversation with a friend today who seems to believe we have to be at 0 cases to change levels, and I tried to explain to him that's not necessarily the case. 0 cases would obviously be ideal, but as long as they can be ringed, essentially, like we can turn around and say, look, we're not going to spread it any further because everyone who's infected we know who they are and can control that. Is that an accurate way of explaining it, or did I screw something up and tell him the wrong information?
Well, that's what I would expect. And listening to Dr. Bloomfield this today as well. And one of the things they do really well is the way we track contact tracing in New Zealand is really good, because in a lot of countries you can't just go, well, here's 40,000 people and we think they might have come in contact with the person carrying COVID. So that's a really good thing we do. And the numbers they run after that, for example, I think today Dr. Bloomfield said there was 75% of people were actually related directly, and their hope was that the rest over the days will also be confirmed related. It's not just coming out of random community ones. So I think at some point they will hopefully make that decision based on how many percentage of those cases are directly linked to the ones that are already out in the community. But that is definitely one of the big factors in deciding. And I think and the government has explored all the options as well, because if you remember when we first started, it was all level 4 last year as well, and then there was that period of going level 3, level 2. And in some ways, as long as people follow the guidelines, you should be able to divide the country into different levels as well. But it is logistically that much harder too, because if you imagine that walking Waikato boundary is not easy to manage.
It's not. I think people forget that, especially when it's as far south as Mercer. So you've got offshoots that go towards Coromandel and out towards the Bay of Plenty. You've got stuff that goes down the Waikato. You've got side areas down through Pukekohe. Like there's a lot there to try and manage. A massive job for the cops.
And it's really interesting as well. I mean, if you think about somebody living in Mercer, like, for them, it's just their normal life and normal neighborhood and everything. And suddenly one side of the town might be, level 4, another might be level 3. And you can never I think you can never get it right. Like, no matter where you put the line, somebody is their work or their life will be affected by it regardless. And as you rightly said, and then suddenly the roads and the motorways divide into multiple bits as well. So that's quite a bit of a logistical challenge.
Yeah, I'm very glad I don't have to deal with that. I'll stay home and rest and relax and work from home and not go out and worry about things. It's much safer.
And I think that's what, like the hats off to, all these essential workers. I mean, police doing such an amazing work. I mean, during the last 1.5 years, their job sort of gone a lot from doing, the crime stuff to having to manage MIQ facilities, trying to chase people who've run out from MIQ facilities, obviously, doing these barriers across different alert levels. I mean, there's a lot more they're doing than what they were doing, 2 years before. So hats off to them for adapting and actually.
Yeah, they've done very well out of it. As a doctor yourself, when you first started training for medicine, is this the sort of thing that you would ever have foreseen? Like, I remember growing up and hearing, the worst case scenario is an airborne virus that you don't see, and there was all sorts of hypothetical planning. Was that something that they sort of go over in medical school and go, well, the worst case scenario, but it'll never happen, or you've got to be aware of it? Like, what's it like to see a pandemic from a doctor's perspective?
Well, it is quite interesting. And, I mean, just a few months before the pandemic started, I was actually in Cuba on a holiday with a friend of mine. And I think at that point, there's measles going around quite a bit around the world. Just a few months ago, we were talking, and I was just saying, like here we were like worried about, what would happen if we, somebody got measles, then, we got stuck in Cuba or something. And we just couldn't imagine, like the whole world would, sort of literally stop like this. But it is interesting, I think when you are practicing medicine and you see patients come in with this, and I clearly remember in January last year, when you started hearing news about people in Hong Kong, China getting infected. I had one patient come in, and she was just a bit like, wow, just traveled here from overseas through one of the countries. What if I've got it? And it's like, oh well, I doubt it, sort of thing. Yeah. Well, maybe and then a few weeks later, as things get worse, I remember telling this one couple, and they were going to Tanzania for a wedding. And they were a young couple, and they were going to Australia, Dubai, South Africa. The flight was really complicated. And I was saying to them, the logistics, like, what if your flight got cancelled? And they said, oh, well, Air New Zealand will give us a refund. And I said, yeah, but what are you going to do with the $5,000 refund sitting at a random airport in Dubai? It's like, yeah. What does it actually mean? And they were just like, oh wow, that's a really good point. Like, we didn't really think about it like that. And I think that's again, coming from, having traveled quite a bit. Similarly, I had another lady who was actually going for a tummy tuck and a breast enlargement and to Thailand. And she was just adamant that she had to go. And I was trying to convince her, saying, look, it's not the most urgent thing. You could go after the pandemic. And she was like, oh, look, I've got lots of money. Like, I could just play golf in Thailand. What's the worst case scenario that's going to happen? And I never heard back from her. Exactly. So I never heard back from her. She said she was going, so I never really found out if she did end up going or what happened to her. But it was interesting, but like, I mean, those are the conversations we were having in February or, end of January, well before sort of lockdown got put in. So it was really interesting seeing it from that doctor's point of view. And now, like, there's so many documentaries out there, that's fascinating as well. I mean, there's one on Netflix on pandemic. And it's just incredible just watching that how much, pandemic related work a lot of countries had done. And despite all of that, like, look at America, despite all of that, the response has been a bit slow. And I think a lot of us have just been taken up by a bit of surprise as well. You hear about the Spanish flu and all these things. Yeah. It just sounds so distant. And I think often I just feel like we also make excuses. So we just go, well, yeah, but, back in the 1900s, like, who really knew what they were doing? Like, medicine wasn't as advanced, and surely you're not going to have a virus on this scale which will just stop economies altogether.
Yeah, no, that's not quite how it worked out.
No, but it'll be interesting, I think, for all of us yet telling the next generation about it. It's kind of like, when people tell you about the war or something and you just can't relate to it. And, people talk about World War II and you're just like, yeah, right, okay. I mean, yeah, I've seen it in the movies. And I can just imagine, like, 30, 40 years down the road telling kids about it and they're just going.
It's actually kind of scary to think we're living through the middle of something that will be written up about in history books.
Well, exactly, isn't it? Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, and in a way, it's interesting, isn't it? Like, everything's become so normal. Going to the supermarket, lining up, washing your hands, QR codes.
Yes.
Funny, 2017. I was getting my business cards designed, and I asked them to put QR codes on it. I've been using them since 2015. And I just got told, no, nobody uses QR codes. Why would you put a QR code on the business card? And I was adamant, and I said, it's so much easier because I can change, wherever the QR code leads to. I could change the website tomorrow. I can put the email address, whatever it is. And now it's everywhere.
Yes.
And I still have it on my business card. But there's a lot of things we would have never thought about back then.
Honestly, I'm sort of sitting here going, I can't wait to see how this year is looked back on in 10 to 15 years. Like it's going to be an interesting retrospective where I'll be able to sit there and go, no, I survived that. I managed to get through that, which I'm really hoping happens.
Exactly. And it's amazing how businesses have adapted. Like you're talking about little mom and pop shops who are doing takeaways and deliveries, and they've got online sort of systems as well. And in a way, I guess just like the war, where war often helps technology being adapted quite faster. I think it's pretty much the same here as well, isn't it? Because we're talking about QR codes, we're talking about people doing click and collect sort of shopping. There's so many things that have changed, and the way we shop has changed as well. And I think especially for a lot of elderly, there's a big change here for them to learn how to do things. I mean, I've got Labour Party volunteers and friends who are in the late 70s and early 80s, and they've suddenly joined our Facebook, and we're doing FaceTime videos. There's this lovely lady, she's 78, and she shows me her puzzles and all the things that she's doing on FaceTime videos. But all those things that you would never expect people to do, but they have to adapt now.
Yeah, but it's just this automatic process that now we know that is a case. We know what the reaction's going to be. We sort of know how to prepare for it, and people still freak out. That's the thing that gives people still freak out.
And I think for a lot of people, it's kind of like PTSD as well. Like every time they go into lockdown, they get traumatized by it. But definitely, I mean, I remember first lockdown, going home and packing groceries and stuff, and just going, well, this is it. Like, it was always, I think I took a photo of the sunset and going, this is probably the end of the world. And funny enough, recently, I mean, now that I've had some time during lockdown to be in the same city and, sleep in the same bed, I realized I've got a Netflix account that I haven't used for over 2 years.
Oh, there's so much stuff on there now.
There is. So, I watched 28 Days Later and, 28 Weeks Later.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, but it's pretty much the same, isn't it? Like, the roads are empty, like it's just the whole world. But watching that movie 10 years ago was just like, oh yeah,
it's a zombie film. Movie. It's escapist fun. Now it's
exactly like a virus, a rage virus. Exactly. And now it's like, well, this is kind of like it. And some people waking up going, where the hell are we? And I remember the first lockdown hearing about people who'd gone camping and hiking and then come down. And funny enough, they had no idea what was going on.
Yeah, I can't say I envy them. Like I'd hate to sort of walk out and think, why is there nobody out here? Like get out of the bush and suddenly there's nobody around. That would actually be kind of creepy.
It would be. I mean, it still is. And, like when you think about it, like, I think that's the thing, like a lot of us keep ourselves busy. Like, we're focused on the 1 p.m. updates and, we're still doing Zoom meetings and stuff. But there are times when you just slow down and stop and just think like, how unusual are these times? And I often think, maybe we'll probably not be traveling for a long time. And I said to my friend, look, it's good that we went to Cuba now because we're not going to go to Cuba for 10 years.
Yeah.
And he said, 10 years? Like, what? Why? And I said, well, you live in America and, things are not looking good for another 3-4 years at least, in America or anywhere else, right? So Cuba's obviously going to take a bit more time. But I think just for him, it just sort of hit him slowly as well. Like, oh, yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty much, I think, what everybody's at the moment is just, oh, shit.
But I think the one thing I've seen is, what keeps people together is knowing that we're all in it together. It's not affecting one section of the society, or, like the rage virus in 28 days later. It's not just one country. It's not like South Island is stuck and everybody else. Although at the moment you might feel like Auckland is the only place.
Yeah, I've had a few conversations that have started with, "Thank you for your sacrifice." It's like, well, I've literally done nothing. I've sat at home for most of the last 3 weeks, but I get where you're coming from. Aucklanders do feel like they're sort of getting it hard.
Though, and I think that's where sometimes the frustration can come when people break that lockdown, notices. And it's like literally you just have to stay at home. That's all you really have to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like it gets boring, but I've got Netflix and Disney and Amazon and TVNZ, and I've got computers, and I've got computer games, and I've got a big yard, and I've got a decent sized house, and I can go for a walk. It's not a bad way to be locked down.
No, that's right. But at the same time, while I think COVID has been a good equalizer, everyone's, whether you're rich, poor, everyone's been affected by it, which doesn't happen a lot in society.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of things which affect everyone the same. You can talk about Christchurch earthquakes really just affected people in Christchurch, or, you can talk about, maybe even the terrorist attacks or any other sort of calamity. But this sort of has affected everyone. But at the same time, I do say that, when I was a doctor, what I did see was it does affect people differently. Like, I had patients, they were like, "Oh, I had a 10-acre plot. This is the best thing ever." "What do you mean by isolation?" Like, we're always like doing this. This is great. Did all the gardening and everything. And then I had other patients who were like, we're 6 in a room, like mom and dad have kids and they normally do 2 jobs. Now they can't go out, and, that's just sort of affecting mental health. It's affecting other health, domestic violence, all that sort of stuff. So in some ways it's equalized things, but in the other ways it hasn't, because there's a lot of disparity.
It's exacerbated it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. So last official question on the record before I stop recording. What's the best advice you can give people to help them get through the lockdowns?
So I've posted about it a few times on Facebook as well. I guess there's a lot of advice around. I think the biggest thing I feel like when people are at home and working from home is not having a routine. And that can be a big problem, because once you start, sleeping at 4 a.m., watching movies and getting up at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, you just don't have that, your cycle, body clock isn't working at the right time. So making sure, you're sleeping on time, getting up on time, but also trying to do as much of the routine stuff as you can. So for example, for my staff, in Hamilton and Wellington, we have a Zoom meeting every morning at 8:30. Which just means, we all start the day together. We know people have woken up and they're all ready to go. And after that, people can have their breakfast and coffee if they want, but just make sure. So I think that's having that body clock at the right time and just having a routine is very important. And that's the same for, weekends and weekdays, because at the moment, everything just blends together. It's hard to tell if it's a Sunday or a Tuesday. But if you do it in a way that, you 5 days work and you do 2 days off, rest, that just means that there's a bit more that normal routine. So it also means, doing your maybe supermarket shoppings after hours and doing them in weekends. Obviously, we don't want people lining up at the same time, but just giving a bit more normal routine. Like, you wouldn't go out at 12 o'clock on a Tuesday or a Wednesday to do your shopping. So those sort of things. I think making sure that you are still connected to the rest of the world. So again, as you said, Zoom calls, phone calls, all those sort of things. And, a lot of my friends and I, we have drinks on Zoom sometimes, even with colleagues, just making sure that there is somebody to talk to. And again, you hear so much about different people and their stories just during lockdown about how it's affecting them as well. But keeping those connections together is very important. Other stuff around mental health, obviously there's a lot of resources. There's, Youth Line, Kids Line, 1737. There's diversity counseling as well for people from, the ethnic backgrounds, if they want to talk in a different language. But I think understanding that in a way it is affecting everyone. So you're not in it alone, and making sure you have somebody to talk to is quite important. And I think also not being too hard on yourself. Sometimes, when we go into those lockdowns, we also feel like, oh, this is the time where you got to renovate the house and, sort out the garage and clean the car and everything else, and still keep your job and justify it. So it is important that you don't take it all on board and start doing it all in that 2 weeks when you're locked down.
Perfect. Words from an expert.
Well, thank you. I think we're all experts by now, isn't it? Like, having lived through the lockdown. The thing is, where my house is, there's a lot of noise every day, just cars driving past and
Yeah.
stuff. And nowadays, sometimes it's so quiet. Like I have to put the radio on at night. Like, like some of the, I know some of our elderly people, they like to listen to Radio New Zealand and News Talk ZB or something.
Yeah.
I have that on at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock at night because I can't sleep because it's so quiet.
Yeah.
And
See,
and that's interesting.
My street's been busier, which I found really interesting. Like more people walking past and stuff like that. There was actually a local family today who decided that it was Father's Day. They're going to do a bit of a treat for their dad. And so they all got dressed up in tiger onesies and did
Wow.
their street tour. And they put a big invite out to people. And it's like, come and join us, socially distanced. But they ended up with about a dozen people in different costumes walking around the street today.
Wow.
It's really cool. But it's constantly people riding and running and dog walking and all the rest of it. Like the streets feel busier with foot traffic now than they ever did with car traffic. But
that's good as well, isn't it? Because I've seen more people now cycling and walking.
Yes.
And I say the same about myself. I mean, look, this whole year, I probably walked 2 or 3 times in the whole year. And in the last 10 days, I've walked every single day for an hour or so just to make sure, I'm getting there walking. And suddenly, when the first time you walk, you just feel like, oh God, 500 meters is a stretch.
Yes.
And I'm just thinking,
so
wow, like I can't believe how unhealthy I am.
Yeah.
So it's really helped. And we were actually, some of our friends, we were talking and we were just saying, in some ways, there should be a government mandated 2 months, sort of lockdown every year.
Oh, yeah. Try it.
Which
See
is
how
not
well
a
that goes down.
Well, probably have to talk to the Prime Minister.
I can tell you now, she's going to say no, because can you imagine the shit you would get? Can you imagine trying to tell Jerry Brownlee he has to walk and exercise for 2 weeks every year? It's not going to happen.
All of us, look, it's very hard. But what I do find is these days, because of just the pressures people have, and there's also a little bit of FOMO when you have those 4 or 5 weeks off. I mean, politicians don't, but a lot of people, when you get your time off, people just take them off to go to Queenstown or they'll go to Europe, and they come back even more tired than they've ever been.
Yeah.
But the great thing about this lockdown is, people are actually just spending time with kids and reading books and cooking. Like for me, the biggest thing that's come out is I've actually cooked every single day, 2 meals, which I just haven't done the whole year at all.
That's impressive. That is very impressive.
No, I'm really enjoying it. Yeah. But those sort of things, it's been really good. And that's why I say, 2 months of lockdown every year would be pretty.
I'm down for it.
Good.
I'm totally, even if you rotate it so that you don't have people sitting there complaining about the economy. Like if your birthday is in the first 6 months, this is when your 2 months. If your birthday is in the second 6 months, that's when your 2 months are. That works. I like that. I want to thank Dr. Gaurav Sharma again for joining me. Being an MP, I know he's incredibly busy. Even though we're in the middle of a lockdown, the job of an MP never really stops. They're always on call. They're always public facing. So I really do appreciate the time that he spent sitting down and having a chat to me. It was a fantastic conversation. I should also point out that before anybody goes and says, oh, this Labour MP said something about Jerry Brownlee having to walk for 2 weeks, that was me. I said that. Don't go accrediting it to the wrong person. If you want to follow Dr. Sharma on any of his social media platforms, I've got them all listed below this video in the description. Please feel free to give him a follow. Tell him I sent you. Tell him I said hi. Other than that, you can always like, share and subscribe to these videos to get more of them when they come out. Or feel free to watch some of the other great interviews that we've had done so far. Until then, have a great day and I'll catch you next time.